Ever think you're the star of your own story, only to find out you're just the guy holding the script for someone else's big scene? That's me, stuck on my brother's futon with stale coffee. Turns out, I was the punchline all along. I'm sitting here in my brother Michael's guest room, sipping lukewarm coffee that tastes like it's been sitting in the pot since last Tuesday, staring at this faded Polaroid of Alice and Maddie from back when they still thought I was Superman. Alice is 26 now, Maddie's 24, and I'm not even sure why I brought the damn photo with me when I bolted out of the house last week. Maybe it's habit, maybe it's guilt. Look, I'm not saying I was husband of the year or anything. God knows I forgot anniversaries and left the toilet seat up more times than Jane deserved, but after 30 years with her, I figured we'd at least earn that rocking chair on the porch ending, you know, the one where you're old and creaky, arguing about who gets the last slice of pie while the grandkids run around. Turns out I was the only one buying that dream, and now I'm crashing on a lumpy futon wondering where the hell it all went sideways. Back when Jane and I got hitched, I was 22, she was 20, and we were broke as hell. Columbus, Ohio. Wasn't exactly a fairy tale setting, more like a gray tangle of cul-de-sacs and strip malls, but we made it work. Our first place was this tiny apartment off Broad Street with a leaky faucet and a mattress we found on Craigslist's free section. I was hauling boxes at a warehouse, she was waitressing at a diner, and we'd split a can of SpaghettiOs like it was a gourmet date night. "We're gonna make it big one day," she'd say, grinning over her chipped bowl, her hair still damp from the shower because the hot water only lasted 5 minutes. I'd laugh and say, "Yeah, big enough to afford 2 cans." That was us, scrappy, stupid, and happy. Fast forward a couple years, Alice came along, then Maddie, and suddenly we're a family in a split-level house with a patchy lawn and a mailbox that never stayed shut. I kept the warehouse gig, moved up to manager eventually, while Jane clawed her way into a paralegal job at some fancy law firm downtown. She was good at it too. Sharp, organized, the kind of woman who could juggle a depot and a PTA meeting without breaking a sweat. Or so I thought. Alice was always the golden kid. Valedictorian in high school, top of her class at Ohio State, now engaged to this finance guy named Chad. Yeah, Chad, because of course his name's Chad, who wears boat shoes even in winter. She's got a big fall wedding coming up, and I've been shelling out cash for it like it's my second job. Maddie's different. Softer. She's 24, works at this artsy coffee shop where they charge you $6 for something called a lavender oat latte, and she's still got that little kid habit of calling me daddy when she's scared or needs cash for rent. Last week, she hugged me out of nowhere and said, "You're the best, you know that?" And I just about melted. I raised those girls to be tight Hal. I raised them to love each other, love their mom, love me. The 3 of them had this thing they called girls' dinner where they'd meet up every couple weeks at Applebee's or wherever just to catch up and giggle over mozzarella sticks. Jane would come home all glowy saying stuff like, "Alice is so stressed about the wedding, but Maddie made her laugh with some dumb story about her boss." I'd nod and say, "That's great, hun," feeling like I'd hit the dad jackpot. A family that close? That's the dream, right? But then there was that barbecue last month, the one we threw for Maddie's birthday. I'm flipping burgers in the backyard, the girls are tossing a frisbee, and Jane's over by the picnic table, laughing too hard at her phone. I wander over with a plate of slightly charred patties and say, "What's so funny?" She tucks the phone away real quick, still smiling, and goes, "Oh, just work stuff." Robert sent me a meme about depositions. Robert's her boss. 50-something, slick, the kind of guy who probably owns a boat and calls it the litigator. I shrug it off. "Cool, tell him to send me one about forklifts sometime." She laughs, pats my arm, and that's that. I mean, I trusted her. Who doesn't trust their wife after 3 decades? Sure, she'd been working late a lot lately, coming home with her blouse a little wrinkled and that tired but happy look, but I figured it was the job. She'd earned a promotion last year, and I was proud of her, bragging to the guys at work about my hotshot wife like some schmuck who still thinks he's got it all figured out. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The late nights, the way she'd dodge questions about her day with a quick, "Oh, you know," same old chaos, the extra effort she put into her makeup for those girls' dinners. But who has time to play detective when you're just trying to keep the lights on and the fridge stocked? I'd stumble home from a 10-hour shift, crack a beer, and zone out to reruns of The Office while Jane tapped away at her phone in the other room. "You texting the girls?" I'd call out once, and she'd say, "Yeah, Maddie's freaking out about a latte art fail," and I'd chuckle like an idiot. God, I was dumb. Back when we were eating ramen 3 nights a week, I knew every inch of her. Every laugh, every worry. Now she's screwing her boss, and I'm still the jackass who can't cook a decent meal without setting off the smoke alarm. That Polaroid on Michael's nightstand catches my eye again. Alice in her graduation cap, Maddie with paint on her cheek, Jane and me, grinning like we'd won the lottery. I take another sip of this shitty coffee and mutter to myself, "Yeah, Matthew, you really should have seen this coming." But I didn't, not even close. So there I was last Wednesday, slouched at the kitchen counter after a long shift, scrolling through X on my phone, trying to figure out why everyone's suddenly obsessed with some TikTok dance, when I've still got Macarena stuck in my head from '96. The house was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the occasional clatter of Jane getting ready upstairs for one of her girls' dinners. I was half tuned out, sipping a beer that'd gone flat, when her phone buzzed on the counter next to me. I glanced over, old habit, not like I was snooping, and saw a text pop up. "Can't wait to see you tonight." No name, just a number. My brain did that thing where it freezes for a second like a buffering video, and I chuckled to myself, "What am I, the FBI now?" But my hand was already reaching for it, fingers brushing the crack case we'd been too lazy to replace. I swiped it open. Her passcode's been 412 since Alice was born. And there it was, the whole thread staring back at me like a punch to the gut. "Miss you. Once a week isn't enough." From someone labeled R, Jane's reply, timestamped yesterday, "Miss you too." I dropped the phone like it had burst into flames, muttering, "Oh, hell no," loud enough that the dog perked up from his spot by the back door. I sat there, staring at the screen as it dimmed, my beer sweating a ring onto the counter. My first thought was stupid, maybe it's a wrong number, some loser texting the wrong Jane. But then I scrolled up, hands shaking like I'd just chugged 6 espressos, and saw more. "You looked gorgeous last Friday," R wrote. "Thanks. You weren't so bad yourself," she shot back, with a winking emoji. A winking freaking emoji. My wife, the woman who once laughed at me for burning toast, was winking at some dude through her phone. I shoved the stool back, pacing the kitchen, trying to piece it together. R. Robert, her boss, that smarmy bastard from the barbecue with his pressed suit and his, "Oh, Jane's indispensable at the firm" bullshit. I should have known. Those late nights, that extra perfume she'd been dabbing on lately. But I was too busy playing good husband, good dad to notice the obvious. Jane came bouncing downstairs right then, heels clicking on the hardwood, hair done up like she was heading to a gala instead of Applebee's. She leaned over, kissed my cheek, and said, "Don't wait up, hun?" Her voice all breezy and warm. I forced a grin, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached, and managed a weak, "Have fun with the girls." She grabbed her purse, waved, and was out the door before I could blink. The second it clicked shut, I lunged for her phone again, fumbling with the settings until I turned on location sharing. "Yeah, I'm that guy now," I muttered, watching the little dot of her car pull out of the driveway. I sank back onto the stool, eyes glued to my own phone as her blip moved across the map. Not toward the usual spot downtown, but out to some swanky Italian place off High Street. The kind of joint where you need a reservation and a tie just to get a breadstick. My stomach churned. But I kept telling myself, "Chill, Matthew, you're jumping the gun." Maybe it's a surprise thing with the girls. I grabbed my keys anyway, hands sweaty on the steering wheel as I drove across town, muttering, "So there I am, 52 years old, turning into a Lifetime movie villain. Next step, tailing her in a trench coat, right?" The radio was blaring some old Springsteen tune, Born to Run, because the universe has a sick sense of humor, and I barely noticed the red lights I blew through. I had to know. I texted Alice first, "What time's dinner with Mom?" Her reply popped up fast, 7, "Can't wait." Maddie chimed in a second later, "Same, love you, Daddy." I stared at the screen, popped in a gas station lot halfway to the restaurant, and laughed. A dry, bitter sound that didn't even feel like mine. "Either my girls suck at lying or I'm about to lose my damn mind," I said to the empty car, tossing the phone onto the passenger seat. They were in on it. My own daughters, texting me heart emojis while their What? What the hell was she doing? I pulled into the restaurant lot 10 minutes later, heart hammering like I'd run a marathon. The place was all glass and dim lights, fancy enough that I felt dumb in my warehouse polo and jeans. I didn't go in, just parked across the street and squinted through the window. Took me all of 5 seconds to spot her. Jane, my Jane, sitting at a corner table, laughing. her hand resting on some guy's across the tablecloth. Robert, 50-something, slick as hell, leaning in close with that smug grin I'd seen at the barbecue. Not a business meeting, unless business means screwing my wife. I fumbled my phone out, snapped a picture through the glass, blurry but clear enough, and sat there, breathing hard, telling myself, maybe it's a prank. Maybe I'm the asshole here. But I wasn't. I knew it in my bones. My thumb hovered over the family group chat. Me, Jane, Alice, Maddie, the one we used for dumb memes and grocery lists. I uploaded the photo, typed enjoying girls' dinner, and hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Then I peeled out of the lot, tires squealing. Springsteen still wailing about running away. I didn't look back. Didn't want to see her face light up with that notification. Didn't want to hear the excuses. I just drove, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white, thinking about that Polaroid back at Michael's. Those smiles, that life, and wondering how long it'd all been a lie. I ended up at Michael's place that night, practically crashing through his front door with my keys still dangling in my hand, the engine of my truck still ticking in the driveway. He took one look at me, wide-eyed, smelling like gas station coffee and desperation, and didn't even ask, just pointed to the pull-out couch in his living room and said, "You know where the blankets are." I collapsed onto it, the springs creaking under me, and turned my phone off because I couldn't deal with the buzzing that started the second I hit send on that damn group chat photo. 30 years with Jane, and I'm sleeping on a couch that smells like stale beer and regret. Awesome. I kept replaying that scene in my head, her laughing with Robert, her hand on his, that easy way she leaned into him like I'd never existed. It looped over and over, a shitty highlight reel I couldn't pause, and I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazy circles, wondering how I'd been so blind. Morning came too fast, gray light sneaking through Michael's blinds, and I finally fished my phone out of my pocket. I powered it on, bracing myself like I was about to defuse a bomb. The screen lit up with 47 missed calls, mostly Jane, a few from Maddie, one from Alice, and a flood of texts that made my stomach lurch. Jane's first one, "Please call me, it's not what you think," right? Because holding hands with your boss at a candlelit dinner is totally a work thing. Maddie's came in a frantic burst. "Dad, I'm so sorry I messed up. Please don't hate me." Alice, cool as ever, "You're overreacting." I stared at that last one, my thumb hovering over the screen, and let out a laugh that sounded more like a choke. Overreacting? I tossed the phone onto the coffee table and rubbed my face hard, like I could scrub the whole night away. Michael shuffled in from the kitchen, barefoot and bleary-eyed, carrying 2 beers even though it was barely 8 a.m. "You look like crap," he said, handing me one. "Thanks," I muttered, cracking it open. "Feel like it too." I couldn't sit still with those messages burning a hole in my brain, so I grabbed the phone again and dialed Maddie. She picked up on the first ring, voice all shaky and wet, like she'd been crying for hours. "Dad?" she said, and I could hear her sniffling. "Hey, kid," I said, keeping it steady even though my chest felt tight. "What the hell's going on?" She hiccuped, then it all spilled out. "Mom told us months ago about her and Robert. She said it ends soon. Begged us not to tell you. Said she didn't want to hurt you." I gripped the beer can so hard it dented, my voice cracking as I cut in. "You lied to my face for months? Maddie, every time you said girls' dinner you knew?" She sobbed harder. "I didn't know what to do, Daddy. I thought she'd stop. I didn't want everything to fall apart." I swallowed thickly, staring at the Polaroid I'd left on the armrest, her little paint-smeared face grinning up at me, and said, "You already let it fall apart, kid." She kept crying, mumbling apologies, but I hung up, my hands shaking too bad to hold the phone. Michael was watching me from the recliner, nursing his beer, and I didn't even look at him when I opened Alice's text again. "It's Mom's mess, not ours," she'd written. "Don't blow up a good marriage over this." I read it out loud, my voice rising. "A good marriage? What planet is she on?" He snorted, slamming his can down on the table hard enough to slosh foam over the edge. "They're all in on it, man," he said, leaning forward. "Your girls picked her, that's what this is." I grabbed my phone, pulled up the photo I'd sent, the blurry shot of Jane and Robert, and stared at it until my eyes burned. Her smile hit me harder now, sharper, like a knife twisting in my ribs. Michael was right. This wasn't just Jane sneaking around. My own kids, Alice with her perfect life, Maddie with her big heart. They'd thrown me under the bus without a second thought. I leaned back, running a hand through my hair, and let out a dry chuckle. Guess I'm the bad guy now, I said, glancing at Michael. Shoulda known. Alice has been team mom since she learned to argue, and Maddie's too nice to say no to anybody. He smirked, shaking his head. Yeah, well, 30 years of changing diapers and coaching soccer, and you get a group chat middle finger. Cool life, bro. I laughed again, but it didn't feel good. It was the kind of laugh that stings, the kind you choke on when you're trying not to yell. I scrolled through the texts again, Jane's pleas piling up. Let me explain. We need to talk. I love you. Love me? I tossed the phone onto the cushion next to me, watching it bounce once before settling, and muttered, Love me enough to screw your boss, huh? Michael got up to grab another beer, clapping me on the shoulder as he passed. You're too good for this shit, Matt, he said, his voice gruff but steady. They don't deserve you. I didn't answer, just sat there with my dented can, the cold aluminum biting into my palm. He was right, but it didn't fix the hole in my chest. I built this family, I said, more to myself than him, my voice cracking again. Every late shift, every soccer game, every damn mortgage payment. How do they just erase me? Michael paused in the doorway, looking back with a frown, but he didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I grabbed the Polaroid, tracing the edge with my thumb, and felt something snap inside. Like the last thread holding me together finally gave out. I pitched the phone across the room, not hard, just enough to hear it thud against the wall, and growled under my breath. Screw it. I'm done playing nice. Michael raised his beer in a silent toast, and I slumped back, staring at the ceiling again, knowing this was just the start of the mess I'd have to wade through. I didn't sleep much after that night at Michael's, just tossed around on the pull-out couch until the springs dug into my back and the room started glowing with that pale morning light that makes everything look worse. My phone was still on the floor where I'd chucked it, screen cracked now from the impact, but I didn't care. I kept hearing Maddie's sobs in my head, Alice's cold text, Jane's bullshit excuses piling up like spam mail I couldn't delete. Michael poked his head in around noon, holding a greasy bag from the diner down the street. You gonna eat or you just planning to stare at the wall all day? He said, tossing the bag onto the coffee table. I grunted, dragging myself upright, and pulled out a bacon sandwich I didn't even want. Gotta face her sometime, he added, flopping into the recliner. Rip the Band-Aid off. I nodded, chewing slowly, knowing he was right, but dreading it all the same. I texted Jane an hour later. Meet me at the house, 3 p.m. She replied fast, I'll be there. No hon, no love you, just cold, clipped words that felt like a stranger's. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked the same. Red shutters, patchy grass, that stupid wind chime Maddie made in 5th grade still dangling by the porch, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Jane was already inside, sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in, looking like she hadn't slept either. No wedding ring on her finger, eyes puffy and red, hands twisting a napkin into knots. She stood up fast, voice shaky. Matt, it was a mistake, okay? I swear it didn't mean anything. I dropped my keys on the counter with a clatter and laughed, sharp and bitter. A year-long mistake? You're kidding me, right? She flinched, stepping closer, but I held up a hand to stop her. How long, Jane? Just say it. She bit her lip, eyes darting away, then whispered, almost a year. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, and shook my head. And the girls? I pressed. She sank back into the chair, voice breaking. I told them a few months ago. I didn't want them to hate me. I laughed again, louder this time, the sound bouncing off the cabinets. So you made them hate me instead? Real classy move? She started crying then, big messy sobs. But I didn't budge, just stood there, arms crossed, feeling the anger bubble up like a pot left on the stove too long. I was lonely, Matt, she said between gasps. You were always working, and Robert, he listened. I snorted, cutting her off. Oh, spare me the sob story. I was working to keep this roof over our heads while you were screwing your boss. Don't put this on me. She reached for my hand, but I yanked it back, turning to the sink so I wouldn't have to see her face. We can fix this, she said, softer now. We've been through worse. I spun around, voice rising. Worse than you dragging our daughters into your lies? Worse than Maddie crying her eyes out because you made her keep your dirty secret? She didn't answer, just stared at the shredded napkin, and I stormed out to the living room, needing air before I lost it completely. I didn't stay gone long, just long enough to cool off, and set up meets with the girls next. Maddie wanted to see me that afternoon, so I picked a park near Michael's, figuring neutral ground might keep me from yelling. She showed up in a hoodie, eyes swollen, and threw her arms around me before I could say a word. "Dad! I'm so sorry!" she choked out, clinging tight. I hugged her back, softer than I meant to, and pulled her to a bench. "Talk to me, Mads," I said, keeping my voice steady. She wiped her nose on her sleeve, looking small and lost. I thought she'd stop. She promised she'd end it, and I didn't want you to get hurt. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "You broke my trust, kid," I said, quieter now. "I can't just hug this away." She nodded, tears spilling again, and grabbed my hand. "I hate myself for it, Daddy. Tell me how to fix it." I squeezed her fingers, then let go. "I don't know yet," I said, standing up. "I need time." She didn't follow me, just sat there crying as I walked back to my truck. Alice was different. Met me at a diner the next morning, all business in her pressed blouse and perfect ponytail. She slid into the booth across from me, sipping coffee like we were at a board meeting. "Mom messed up," she said, straight off. "But you're punishing us all for it." I leaned back, crossing my arms, and fired back. "You picked her side, Alice. You lied to me for months. Don't act like you're the victim here." She rolled her eyes, setting her mug down hard. "I didn't pick anybody. I just didn't want to blow everything up over one mistake." I jabbed a finger at her. "One mistake? Your mom's affair isn't a spilled coffee. It's a damn betrayal, and you helped her cover it. Live with that." She glared, voice cool. "You're cutting us out because you're mad." "That's not fair." I stood up, tossing a 5 on the table. "Fair stopped mattering when you all stabbed me in the back," I said, and walked out, her stare burning into my spine. Back at Michael's, I got to work. Canceled our joint accounts with a few shaky clicks, watching years of shared bills vanish into a new account Jane couldn't touch. Called a lawyer, Linda, this tough broad with a smirk who said, "She'll get nothing but regrets, hun," and started the divorce ball rolling. Then I pulled the plug on Alice's wedding fund. 50 grand I'd been saving. "Let Chad's rich parents pony up," I muttered, picturing her scrambling. Or, hey, maybe Robert's got cash to spare. Michael walked in as I was pouring a whiskey, grinning. "Divorce papers are my new love language," I said, raising the glass. "Jane can have Robert and his $200 haircuts. I'm keeping the dog." He laughed, but I wasn't done. I grabbed a framed photo off the shelf at Maddie's 10th birthday, all smiles, and smashed it against the edge of the table. The glass scattered across the floor, and I shrugged. "Oops. Guess that's what 30 years looks like now." I sank onto the couch, whiskey in hand, and stared at the mess. "I'm not the hero here," I said to Michael, voice low, "but I'm not the doormat either." He nodded, cracking a beer. "Damn right." Later that night, I pulled out my laptop and started drafting a will change, cutting Alice and Maddie out, leaving it all to my sister Sarah instead. My hands didn't shake this time. It wasn't about revenge. It was about surviving. A week after I smashed that photo at Michael's, I found myself sitting in Linda's office, pen in hand, staring at the will I'd rewritten. Everything. House, savings, that rusty truck I'd been driving since Maddie was in diapers, was going to my sister Sarah and her kids now. Linda leaned back in her chair, tapping a pencil on her desk, and grinned. "You sure about this, Matt? No turning back once you sign." I didn't hesitate. Just scrawled my name across the bottom, the ink smudging a little where my hand shook. "Yeah," I said, sliding the papers back to her. "I'm sure." She nodded, tucking them into a folder, and added, "Divorce is almost done too. Jane's getting squat, maybe a couple old pots if she's lucky." I smirked, leaning back in the creaky chair. "Good. Let her cook for Robert with him." Linda chuckled, and I walked out, feeling lighter, like I'd finally dropped a bag of bricks I'd been hauling around for months. Back at Michael's, my phone buzzed as I was tossing my keys on the counter. Maddie's name flashed up, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe it open. "Dad," she said, voice thick and wobbly like she'd been crying again. "Hey, Mads," I said, keeping it even, though my throat tightened. She didn't waste time. "I heard about the will. I don't care about the money, I swear. I just want you. Please, don't hate me. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my eyes with my free hand, picturing her all curled up in that hoodie she'd worn at the park. I don't hate you, kid, I said quietly. I love you, Mads, but I need time. You broke something in me and I can't fix it overnight. She sniffled, then whispered, I'll wait however long it takes. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just muttered, take care of yourself, and hung up, staring at the ceiling until Michael wandered in with a pizza box. She okay? He asked, flipping it open. I shrugged. She's a mess, but so am I. Alice hit me up next. Not a call, just a long email that popped into my inbox the next morning while I was nursing a coffee. You're ruining my life over this, it started, all sharp and polished, like she was drafting a memo. Pulling the wedding money was petty, Dad. Chad's parents can't cover it all, and now I'm scrambling. This isn't fair. I read it twice, jaw tight, then deleted it without replying, muttering to myself, You ruined mine first, kiddo. Michael peeked over my shoulder as I closed the laptop. She's got some nerve, he said, shaking his head. Yeah, I said, grabbing my mug. She's Jane, too. Same playbook, different hair, he snorted, and I let myself grin, imagining Alice haggling with caterers while Chad stood there in his dumb boat shoes, clueless. Word got around fast after that. A buddy from work, Dave, called me up a couple days later while I was sweeping glass off Michael's floor. Still hadn't cleaned up that frame. Heard Jane's shacked up with that lawyer guy, he said, voice crackling through the speaker. Sounds like it's already falling apart, though. Guy's a control freak. I swept harder, the broom scraping loud against the hardwood. Not my circus, not my monkeys, I said, and Dave laughed. You doing okay, man? I paused, leaning on the broom, and shrugged, even though he couldn't see it. Better than I was. Divorce is almost done. Linda says Jane's out of luck. Dave whistled. Hell yeah! Drinks on you when it's final? I chuckled. Cheap beer only. That night, Michael and I cracked a couple cans anyway, clinking them together over the pizza box. To freedom and shitty brews, he said, and I nodded, the cold fizz hitting my throat like a small victory. I wasn't cut out for revenge movies, turns out. I'm too damn tired for that Hollywood crap. But hearing through the grapevine that Alice was scrambling for wedding cash, that was my Oscar moment. I pictured her calling vendors, all flustered, while I sat here sipping Coors Light, and it felt good in a petty, screwed-up way. Maddie might come around someday. She's got a heart under all that guilt. But Alice? Good luck, kid. She'd made her bed, and I wasn't tucking her in anymore. I started poking around for something to do with myself after that. Something that wasn't just stewing in my own mess. Signed up for a woodworking class at the community center. Figured making a table beats crying into a pillow. And the first night I walked in with sawdust already sticking to my jeans, listening to some old guy named Phil ramble about oak versus pine. It wasn't life-changing, but it was something. A couple days later, I grabbed coffee with an old high school buddy, Tom, who slapped my back and said, You look like hell, but at least you're upright. I laughed, stirring sugar into my cup. High praise, man. Sitting there at Michael's that night, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge, I thought about it all. Jane with Robert, Maddie's tears, Alice's email, the will sitting in Linda's office. I wasn't healed or whatever bullshit people say on TV. My chest still ached sometimes, like a bruise that wouldn't fade, but I wasn't drowning anymore. That was something. I leaned back on the couch, kicking my feet up on the coffee table, and Michael glanced over from the recliner. You good? He asked, popping another beer. Good enough, I said, and meant it. They'd made their choices, Jane with her affair, Alice with her loyalty, Maddie with her lies, and I'd made mine. I was done bleeding for them. If Maddie knocked one day, maybe I'd answer, let her in slow, see if we could patch things up, but until then, I was out. I grabbed a slice of cold pizza, took a bite, and let the silence settle, feeling, for the first time in weeks, like I could breathe.